followed by 21 years in Aurora, Illinois.
Correct.
And then he was called by our church body to be the planned giving counselor for the Dakota, Montana district.
And Nebraska.
And when Rick Knazer retired, who was doing it here in our district, he was called sideways to leave those two districts and come and serve Southeast Wisconsin. Do you serve any other district?
Nope, just Southeastern
Just
Wisconsin.
Southeast Wisconsin.
So, with my partner who was sick today.
Yep, along with Pastor Lindhorst, who is a good friend of mine. I hate that he wasn't able to make it today. Pastor Lindhorst served on the Adult Discipleship Commission down in the South Atlantic District when I was the chairman. He was one of my assistants and associates down there, so a good friend. I hate that he was sick today, but it is what it is. So I'm going to turn it over to Scott, and we'll be blessed with his presentation.
Thank you, Pastor.
You're
And
welcome.
I thought we were just doing some small talk here. I didn't know he was gleaning information, so he got me on that one. I am also married, have 3 children. All 3 of them are graduates of Luther Preparatory School. And then we have a daughter who did teach here. She graduated MLC in 2020, and Cassandra Wagner. Is it ringing a bell? Okay. So then she taught here for a year, got married, and then she and her husband were out in Sheboygan Falls. She was actually teaching at Kohler Public High School. Both of them are now back full-time at Camp Philip in Watoma. And so, yep. So my son-in-law is program director, Eli, that's correct. And my daughter does teach at the Watoma Public High School, in addition to being kind of the junior staff training person. And so she's always busy, but we do get to talk to them every now and then. Hopefully I'll be attending Camp Philip next week, not attending, but going there to do some projects. So I'm looking forward to spending 3 or 4 days there. Let's see. Teacher, Christian giving counselor, 3 kids. I think I covered it all. So growing up in Chicago and then having that call serving the Dakota, Montana, and Nebraska districts, it was kind of unusual that I would say to my wife, I'm going to Montana this weekend, so I'll see you in a few days. And literally for me, the Chicago boy, to go up and drive through Montana. One of our newest home missions was in Kalispell, Montana. I did make it all the way up there, so that's like as far north and west in Montana as you can get, right on the edge of Glacier. Unfortunately, I did not get into the park. Had too many things going on at the time. So this presentation, I'm calling it Your WELS Legacy. And then, notice that word planning. So planning so that you might provide for your family and for your church, for other WELS ministries at end of life. And, we call this a Christian estate planning seminar, so I really want to emphasize the Christian part. But sometimes when people hear that word estate, they say, well, I don't have an estate, I'm not rich, but everything that you do have really is part of your estate. So that's what we mean with that phrase. In the sermon, Pastor reminded us that Jesus became poor so that we could become rich. And the best riches of all, of course, are our Christian faith, the word that we have, the fellowship we have with other believers. And yet, we do have quite a bit as Americans. I mean, the homes that we have, the cars that we drive, the stores that are available to us. In those ways, we really are rich. And so we're going to talk about, well, what happens when our time on this life is over? How do we then still continue to be good stewards with what God has blessed us with for the next generation? So I'd like to do a little devotion here, and let's see if I turn this on. That might work better. There we go. So how should a Christian view estate planning? What do you think of this question? Or, this statement. You can't take it with you. Is that uniquely Christian? I think everyone would agree you can't take it with you. But that sometimes then leads you to follow one or two different ways of thinking. One would be, all right, if I can't take any of this stuff with me, then I need to enjoy it for as long as I possibly can. I need to get as many toys as I can. I need to eat, drink, be merry, because tomorrow we die. That's one extreme. The other might be, okay, God is giving me these things, or maybe even just I have these things, and so I want to do as much good as I possibly can. I want to make a difference. Think of our public library system and Andrew Carnegie and others like them. They used what they had to do something good. Well, I would say that's not uniquely Christian either. So let's go here. Our Christian life, and so then I would also say our end-of-life planning, has to begin there at the cross. Now, on the cross, Jesus fulfilled one of God's demands. That was punishment. The other demand was perfection. So Jesus lived that perfect life in our place. He was punished in our place. But notice the cross is empty. And as we celebrate Easter, the tomb is also empty. Jesus said, "Because I live, you also will live." And so he was talking not just about this earthly life. We certainly have many blessings, many things to enjoy in this earthly life, but this is temporary. So our other life is eternal life. And Jesus said, "Go and make disciples of all nations," so that they too could enjoy that eternal life. Now, I think maybe the Apostle John got a little peek into what all that disciple making would look like. This is from Revelations chapter 7, verses 9 through 10. "After this I looked," says John, "and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands, and they cried out in a loud voice," would you say that with me? "Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb." How do you picture that great multitude? Do you picture a line that's weaving its way in and out? If you've ever been to Great America, I remember going there many times with my kids, and you'd get in the line and it would snake back and forth, and you think, finally we're inside the little shelter, and the lines still go back and forth. Is that how you picture this great multitude standing before the Lamb and before the throne? Or maybe it's a stadium full of people, and it sounds like one big roar. I was looking for a picture that might help me to present that idea of the great multitude, and this is what I found. So there we have from every nation and tribe and language and people, and if you look closely, there is an adult in that picture too. Did you find the adult? And I would suggest that this really is what Christian estate planning is all about. This really is what our whole life is about. So it's about sharing that word with others so that all of us can stand before the throne, before the Lamb, and praise Jesus. So that's our legacy, and that's what I hope that I can share with you as we go through this presentation. So again, it's called Your WELS Legacy. What is it that you want not only to be remembered by, but what is the eternal difference that you want to be able to make within your own family, within your church, within the WELS community, and so on. So one of the things that I'd really like to do is just to be able to share information with you. So I've stolen this from some other presenter, but part of my role, I feel, is to educate, to illustrate, and to introduce. So I'm going to hopefully take kind of a high-level look at estate planning, the basics of it, the things that you need to think about, as if we were sitting down at your table and we were simply talking through your will, your trust, what you need, what needs to be done. And by the way, that is something that I can do with you. Not an attorney, not a financial expert, so I really am trying to be careful not to give any of that kind of advice. But we can sit down, talk about your goals. If you have a will, we can see if it still meets your needs. If you don't, we can create together a will summary that then you can take to the attorney, and it's supposed to save you time and money in the attorney's office. So I'm going to begin with a little quiz. As Pastor said, I was a teacher for many years. I think you'll see some of my teacherisms coming out. So this is true, false. So if you think it's true, we'll just do thumbs up. If you think it's false, thumbs down, and I'll give you the answer right after each question. So here's number one. If you have a legal will, then your estate, again, everything you own, will not go through probate. What do you think? True or false? That is false. So if you don't have a will, your estate will go through that probate process. If you have a will, your estate will go through that probate process. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means later. How about this? A legal will, remember I was a teacher, a legal will controls the distribution of all assets. What do you think, true or false? Ooh, not so sure on this one, are you? This one is false. Not only your will, but if you have a house, that's a title. If you have life insurance or retirement plans, that's a contract with a beneficiary designation. So titles and beneficiary designations actually are at a higher level than your will. So if you're doing a review of your plans, looking at your beneficiary designations is a great place to start. How about this? The purpose of estate planning is to avoid probate. What do you think, true or false? Not too many willing to commit. It is false. Now, probate does have a cost. It does take time, but it really is there for our benefit. One of the big benefits of probate and the probate process is to avoid fraud, so that someone isn't stealing from our estate so that it's distributed in the manner that we wish. However, if we can streamline the process, make it a little bit easier on our kids and those who survive us, that would be our goal. To streamline, not necessarily to avoid it altogether. Number 4, power of attorney forms are provided by a lawyer. True or false? It's true, but that's not the only place that you can get them. So it's kind of a trick question. And we'll talk some more about the power of attorney forms. Number 5, this is really a vocabulary kind of question. So a living will and a simple will are the same things. What do you think? True or false? And that is also false. So a living will are the directives that you give to the doctor when they say there's nothing more we can do. So how do you want them to treat you at that point? That's a living will. A simple will is really another term for a legal will. And when I use the term simple will, I'm contrasting that to a living trust. And a trust is a little bit different than the will here. So I have to be careful of the words that I use, and I have to also make sure that you understand how that word is being used. And number 6, okay, here's that trust again. So a living trust is the best option for everyone. What do you think, true or false? See the words best and everyone? Yeah, it's false. A living trust is an excellent tool. We'll talk about some of its advantages. There are some attorneys who say everyone should have a living trust. Other attorneys who've said to me, as I've asked them, we hardly ever use them anymore. So it's a good tool. It has lots of advantages, but is it the best for everyone? No, there are alternatives that will work equally well. All right, so I'm going to skip this part. Normally I appoint a secretary and I have them write down your questions. I will just say that I'll stay here after the presentation. I'll take any extra questions or detailed questions that you might have. Well, here's a question to you. What if you don't have a plan? If you don't have a will, if you don't have an estate plan, then here's the first thing. The court system, the probate court in this county, are we in Milwaukee County? Okay, so in Milwaukee County, there's probably even more than one probate court. The judge there would appoint the people to represent you. Now, we'll talk about those various people, but this means you've given up the right to make that decision. Your property, now people think it goes to the state right away. Well, that can happen if you have no relatives. But every state has this line of succession, and it always goes down. So it would be to your spouse or children first, grandchildren. If you don't have children, then it goes back up to your parents, then back down, so aunts and uncles. And so every state has a time limit, and they have to do their due diligence to try and find a relative. But again, that might not be the way you had intended for your money and your property to be used. More time, more fees, potential headaches for those that you've left behind. And notice this last part. There won't be any gift to charity or ministry. And I do tend to use those words interchangeably. So by ministry, I'm usually referring to your church, to WELS Ministries, but there might be charities that you are supporting as well. I've talked to many a pastor who would mention a man or woman in their congregation. They're always volunteering. If there's a project, that person has money for the project. They love their Lord. They love their church. They've been faithful all their life. They die without a will. The children are not of the same mindset. Nothing comes back to the church. So your state's version, Wisconsin's version of your estate plan, will not have any kind of gift for ministry or charity. And it won't contain a Christian testimony. So remember at the beginning I said, what is a Christian view of estate planning? What makes it uniquely Christian? If you don't have a plan, there's nothing there that says you were any different than the rest of the world. So let's turn that around. Why should we do estate planning? I'll start with that Christian testimony. Now, I would suggest that since we know this life is only temporary, if you just have a plan in place, that in itself can be a witness. I know I'm going to heaven, so I've taken care of my earthly arrangements. But you can also put something called a Christian preamble. Now, there's some page numbers. I'll show you which book that is in just a moment. But here is an example of a Christian preamble that can be in your will. I've also seen people who use this as part of their obituary. Lots of people who get a chance to read these, the attorney and so on. I do hereby testify that I am a Christian. I've placed all my hope of life hereafter in Jesus Christ, the Son of God. His death and resurrection have given my life meaning and make my death a peaceful passage to eternal life in heaven. I want my family and friends to know that for me to live was Christ and to die is gain. Now imagine hearing those words and hearing your parents' voice in your head as they give that final testimony to you. Now, you're also showing love to your family, to those who you've left behind. And you might think, oh yeah, okay, I'm going to give them a gift. That's what you mean. Well, no, part of the showing love is also making the arrangements ahead of time so that your children don't have to figure out, well, what did mom or dad have in mind? I don't even know where they keep their accounts. I don't know any of their passwords. I don't know anything. And so they're starting from scratch. So by sharing that information with them ahead of time, and yes, if you choose to provide a gift for your children or grandchildren, all of those are ways of showing love. You can also show love to your Lord, supporting your congregation. And I would say almost all the time when I talk to someone about, well, do you have any charity or ministry in mind? Their church is always number one. Now, sometimes it's, well, whatever WELS church I'm a member of when I die, because they've moved around a lot. Sometimes they've been in a church. I talked to Willie earlier, and he said he's been here 40 years. Is that right? 40 years. A lot of people have been in a church that long, so there's a lot of loyalty there. So maybe you'd like to leave something to your church program or projects and so on, or other WELS ministries, our seminary, for example, Martin Luther College, Home and World Missions. By doing so, you might even inspire other people to want to support that kind of ministry as well. Your WELS, your church body WELS, gives you a lot of resources. So one of them are your Christian giving counselors. So here's the disclaimer, first of all. I'm not a tax advisor, not a financial planner, not an attorney, but I do represent WELS. And generally when we say WELS, we're talking about home and world missions, pastor-teacher training, and then something called congregational services, which is the umbrella for outreach and evangelism and stewardship and discipleship and so on. So that's generally what we mean. But there are many WELS-affiliated ministries. So you can think of our area Lutheran high schools. In this area, Time of Grace is an important one, and so on. Ministry to the deaf and hard of hearing, or special ministries. Those are all WELS-affiliated ministries, and then your church as well. And so if I'm coming to talk to you about your estate plan and you say, I really want to do something for Wisco or for my church, then we'll talk about that and we'll help you to do that. And so this is really what this presentation is about today, is to help you to organize your estate plan for the benefit of your family, very important, but also for the benefit of ministry and or charity. And then if we have time at the end, I'll talk a little bit about what are planned gifts, so I can help people who want to arrange planned gifts for ministry. So Pastor, I'm at 11. What time do we go till?
Usually about 11:20.
Okay, that sounds great. Here are 3 resources. So now if you want to open up your folder, this is the first booklet, and that's where those Christian preambles were found, Estate Planning for the Christian Steward. So the majority of what I'm presenting today comes from that booklet. Then we have a smaller one. I will do a little bit from this, but this is then the planned gifts, different ways to make planned gifts. And if you could actually pull out this sheet, there is a Christian giving feedback form. I use this for my attendance, so if you could fill in at least your name and a way for me to contact you. But if you feel comfortable giving us your birthday, there are certain tax advantages, certain kind of giving options that do depend on your age. So if you could give us your birth date, that would be helpful too. And then down at the bottom, there are things that you can say, yeah, here's something I have questions on, here's something I'd like to talk to you about. And maybe as I go through the presentation, you'll say, oh yeah, and you can mark one of those. I'm going to give you just a couple minutes if you could get started filling in the Christian feedback form. Again, enough so I know who you were and I can contact you, give you a call or send you an email, and then as much as you feel comfortable doing. Did everyone have a pen or pencil? There's some up here if anyone needs one. Okay, good. And I certainly don't mind if you're writing while I'm talking. If you want to keep notes, though, maybe use a different sheet for that. I've been thinking that we need to put a little pad of paper in there for you, but so far that idea hasn't come to fruition. And I certainly don't mind if you look through the booklets as I talk. I am going to go on. So again, these page numbers are from the larger book, the estate planning workbook. So if you do want to follow, you can try and find those. But who is it that will represent you? So again, we're sitting at your kitchen table. I've collected some information about you, your children, and now we're going to start talking about, okay, who are the people that you will nominate? Now, if you're married, then by default, your spouse will fill these roles as the first position, but we're going to talk about alternate. So a first alternate, a second alternate for these positions. So there they are. There are some of the roles that you're going to choose someone, nominate someone to serve in. The first two, power of attorney for finances, power of attorney for health care. This is something that takes place only while you're living. And while they're not required, they are important. So for example, when my daughter Cassandra was trying to get financial aid, we couldn't even talk to the financial aid people without her permission. So if you have children who are 18 and older, they really need to have this power of attorney for finances and for health care in case they're ever in an accident, if they can't communicate, and so on. All right, so the power of attorney. Remember the quiz question? The attorney provides these forms? Yes, generally. In Wisconsin, you can also get the form for financial power of attorney online, so they're also available that way. But just a couple of things to keep in mind. Notice the vocabulary words up there. Limited versus durable power of attorney. Now, DPOA, durable power of attorney. I try not to use too many acronyms, but when it's one that's going to come up often, then I'll try to include it for your benefit. If you were to go on a cruise, let's say to Greece, okay, and you knew you'd be gone for quite a while, and maybe a mortgage payment would be due in the meantime, maybe there would be some other bills that needed to be paid, maybe there would be a possibility that someone would have to borrow money on your behalf, but you're gone. So you can appoint someone, a friend, a relative, a child, an adult child, to have power of attorney. But if it doesn't have that word durable in front of it, then if you become incapacitated, so if Pastor had gotten very ill on his trip and he could not communicate at all, he was unconscious, and he didn't have this power of attorney form, then someone would have to go to the court and say, I need to be either the guardian or the custodian for this man. So what you're doing by setting this up ahead of time with the durable power of attorney, you're giving an agent the authority to make decisions on your behalf when you are unable to do so, for whatever the reason. Okay? Here's a couple of other terms for you. So when a couple each signs the durable power of attorney for finance forms, then the other spouse is named first. And generally, the other spouse has that authority immediately. So as soon as I sign my name, then my wife can do anything I can do with my signature. So she can borrow money, she can buy and sell property, she can trade, and so on. Here's just one example of where that might come into effect. You set up a credit card. Okay, so it's one spouse who made all the calls. My wife did that. So her name was on the credit card. I was listed as an authorized user. I could not even get any answers out of them until I could say, well, but I do have power of attorney for my wife. They can still make you jump through the hoops, but at least it gives you a little bit of that edge to make decisions on their behalf. Springing, on the other hand, is for the alternates. So if my wife is unable or unwilling to serve as my power of attorney, then one of the others would kick in. Or sometimes it will say, if two doctors or a psychologist have deemed that I cannot make reasonable decisions, and again, my primary power of attorney is unable, then my alternates would have that authority. But if my brother is one of my alternates and it's a springing power, he can't go and empty my bank account. Okay, he doesn't have any authority until whatever event takes place that then gives him that. So it's important to know, is this authority I'm giving this person, is it immediate as soon as I sign it? Go ahead.
So with that power of attorney, like, is there a hierarchy or like, so I know with my parents' trust, I know my brother and I have legal power of attorney and my sister that's a nurse has like healthcare power of attorney.
Sure. You have to look at the form. Nope, it wouldn't be who's older. It would be, so if we're putting this together, then I would say, okay, who is the primary power of attorney for you? We'd put that person down. Who's the first alternate? And it would be listed that way. Who's the second alternate? And so basically the wording in there would say, if this person is unable or unwilling, then it goes to this one or to this one. But you can also do it together. So like you and your brother could be co-power of attorney, which means either one of you. Good question, thank you. Okay. And then these do need to be notarized. All right, so power of attorney for healthcare, just a quick history lesson. In the 1980s, the Right to Die societies were the ones pushing the living wills. And so some of that wording kind of sneaks into the forms that we see. You go to the hospital and they say, do you have any health directives? There are different places that you can get these kinds of forms. But sometimes quality of life, that word sneaks in there. Sometimes the hot buttons are the nutrition and the feeding tube and so on. So just be careful. And because of that, I do like to recommend the forms that come from Christian Life Resources. They have the state wording for every state, but they also have a Christian addendum, a Christian declaration of life. They have a page that allows you to list your pastor's name and contact information so that your agent can talk to your pastor if it's a really ticklish kind of situation. And again, they update those every so often. So if you're interested even in this, the power of attorney healthcare forms from Christian Life Resources, I can provide a link for you, or I can show you how to get those resources. All right, so then we move on to your personal representative. Anybody know what the other term is? Your personal representative is also known as your, maybe. That's a little deeper in the legal terminology than I am aware of. Your executor. So your personal representative is your executor. So this is the person who gets everything started. So they need to know where the records are. So if you have a will and you've appointed your executor, don't keep the will in a safety deposit box unless your executor has the key and the authority to get in there, because then we're going to just compound the problems. So they're going to start it. They're going to notify all the creditors. They're going to, now this is important, inventory, value, put a value on, and protect all of your assets, because there might be some overeager relatives who are more than willing to grab some things that are in the home. So it's the executor's job to say, wait a minute, let's look at what mom and dad had to say about this before you start taking things. And then to distribute that property according to the decedent's, that's the dead person's, wishes. Now, they can get help. So the executor can call on attorneys or realtors or accountants, whatever they might need, and they are entitled for compensation for any expenses and for the time that they spend. So that's your personal representative. This is an important position. So obviously someone who's 21 or older, but someone who's organized, good at record keeping, someone who's trustworthy, because obviously, they have a responsibility with your money, your accounts, your property. And here, this is kind of key. When you're choosing someone to be your executor, who's going to be least likely to cause conflict in the family? So maybe it's not one of your children. Maybe it's kind of a relative or friend, someone outside. I don't know. You know your family better than I do. You can also have a bank, a trust department, an attorney can serve as the personal representative. And again, there's that idea of co. So you could have your child and you have the trust department at the local bank. They're going to work together, so there's some accountability there. Now, if you don't appoint an executor, and here too, if you don't have a will, remember the court appoints, notice someone's going to have to volunteer. So maybe it would be the oldest child, but maybe the oldest child, I'm the oldest, by the way, so I'm not picking on you. So maybe the oldest is not the best choice to handle these financial matters, but maybe the oldest would be the first to volunteer, okay? But also creditors. If you owe money to somebody, they can volunteer to be your executor because they want to get paid. So again, keep that all in mind. Now, the last position on there was there was guardian. I wasn't going to talk too much about that. But any parents who have children who are under 18, even if they don't have any money or property, they might consider putting together a will just for the sake of nominating that guardian. Because again, anyone can volunteer. And the person who volunteers might not be best suited or might not be the person or couple that you would choose. But then a trustee is simply someone that you appoint as a manager. So I want to quickly talk about a couple of different kinds of trusts. So I mentioned this one before, the living trust. The living trust has two different flavors. The revocable, or as the attorneys say, revocable, and the irrevocable, but I like to say irrevocable and revocable. To me, that it is more meaningful than irrevocable and revocable. So the living trust is one kind of trust, and then testamentary simply means that it's funded after your death. That living trust, anything that you title to it doesn't go through probate. So here's how it works. You go to the attorney. He sets up this trust document. You'll get a binder about this big. It's pretty thorough. It specifies all of the details, all of your trustees' authority. And then you take the next step, which a lot of people forget about, is you go to the trust department at your bank or the registrar in your county and you say, I need a quit claim deed for my house out of my name into my trust's name. My various banking and checking accounts, I need to put those into the name of the trust. So all your assets, which are in the name of the trust, and by the way, not retirement, not life insurance, at least not as the primary receiver of those, then those things don't go through probate. So that's going to streamline the process. If you have a vacation home,
Does that cut down on like taxes that you pay as somebody who inherits?
hold that thought, because I'm not sure it would. But we'll talk a little bit more about the taxes, and I'll try and answer that. Or we can talk afterwards, okay? So the assets, okay, don't go through probate. And if you own a home in more than one county, you have a vacation home, a cottage, then your survivors would go through probate for your residence. They'd go through probate for that cottage. That would be extending it. So again, that living trust can streamline that process, efficient for real estate in more than one state. Now, why would you set up a testamentary trust, something that's going to be funded after your death? Well, maybe it's for your minor children. If you don't set up something for minors who can't inherit, then the state has a plan for you. It's called the Uniform Transfer to Minors Act. You might see these letters on a life insurance policy, for example, UTMA, Uniform Transfer to Minors Act, which simply means someone is going to be set up as a custodian of that property until the child in Wisconsin reaches age 21. Boom, then it's theirs. A couple of $100,000 to a 21-year-old might not be such a great idea. Okay, so you might set up a trust that instead delays that. Maybe they get a little bit at 25 and 27 and 29, or whatever ages you might like to set up. If you have in your family someone with special needs, especially if they're receiving any kind of federal aid, then setting up a trust makes sense. You're not endangering that aid. Maybe incentive. Okay, so when you graduate college, you'll get a part of your inheritance for your grandchildren or children. Or, on the other hand, if you can stay clean and sober for 6 months, 12 months, whatever, then you'll receive part of this. So again, it's controlling from the grave, but in a way that's loving and kind. If your children aren't very good with money, and again, you know that if they're going to receive $100,000 or $200,000, it's going to be a new boat, a new truck, a vacation, and they're out of here. Maybe you'd want to give it to them in installments. All right, so those are different kinds of trust. Tax issue, I'll try and come back to. Okay, so as we're sitting at your property, as we're sitting at your table, we've talked a little bit about the people that will represent you, and then I'll say, okay, well, let's talk about your property. What is it that you have? Does it have a title? Because that title will determine how it's passed on. So, for example, you and your spouse own a home. Here's another acronym you might see. You've got joint tenancy with right of survivorship. So one spouse dies, the other spouse automatically will inherit because of the title. But if you have land with a partner, a brother, a sibling, a friend, and it's hunting land, you might own that tenancy in common. So that means it doesn't have to be 50-50. Maybe my brother owns 60% of the property, I only own 40%. But if the title says tenancy in common, then my share doesn't go to my brother as the sole survivor. My share can go to my children. So it's very important that you know how that works. I did meet a pastor, had several siblings, and there was this vacation home, and they thought they owned a tenancy in common, but it was with right of survivorship. So if one of the siblings dies, then instead of their share going to their children, nope, it would go to the other siblings. That's not what they had in mind. So it's important to look at those titles. If you have life insurance, if you have retirement, those are contracts. Whoops, there's that living trust again. If you have life insurance, if you have retirement accounts, those are contracts with beneficiary designations. Again, the title, the living trust, the beneficiary designations all supersede the will. Now look at those letters in parentheses there. So POD, if you have a bank account, you can use payable on death. If you have stocks or securities, you can set those up so they are transfer on death, TOD. The TODD is a transfer on death deed. So if mom and dad are most likely in the last house that they're going to own, and they want to easily pass it on to a child, to children, or even to an organization, they can go and get a transfer on death deed.
With the beneficiary designations, you say like it's more, it goes above the will.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is the main question I'm here for. I know my sister is my beneficiary of my life insurance.
Okay.
And she knows that my wishes are to use it for my nephews for education. Now my brother and his wife are expecting a baby, and so if I want it to be used for their education, I would need to have the children listed individually as beneficiaries?
Probably not a good idea. Yeah, probably not a good idea to list the children if they're minors. You could list your brother and your sister as beneficiaries, but you'd have to work it out in some other way that they use it for their children's education.
Is there a way to put your life insurance into a trust so that
Yep.
it will pay out instead, and it's like, now you can,
Yep. So if I had minor children, my kids are 29, 27, soon to be 25, but if I had minor children, then my life insurance could go to either generically the trustee of my children's trust, so you've set that up ahead of time, or you could name them to Dennis, the trustee of my children's trust, something like that.
do you need to change it every time like a new niece or nephew is born?
Not necessarily, because it could say for future children, but you do need to update the beneficiary designations to make sure those are going where they want. My first life insurance policy was to my parents. Well, that wasn't going to do any good, okay? And sometimes when there's a second marriage, that's something that they forget about. Oh, we better change the life insurance policy, okay? So all of those things then don't go through probate. So we can streamline the estate so that it doesn't go through probate, but careful. You can make it so streamlined that your executor, person or representative, doesn't have any money to work with to pay the bills and so on. So it is a balance. And so as we talk together, I give you some of the options, but I try to give you the pros and cons of those various options. Transfer on death deed. Transfer on death deed. Yep. And in Wisconsin, that does work. Not every state does that. Okay, so since we're talking about probate, here's just quickly what that probate process is supposed to accomplish. So either you're going to nominate that executor or the court is going to appoint an administrator. It's going to distribute your assets. Again, that's everything you have. So both real property, personal property, money, and so on. It's going to do that according to your will or according to state law. But remember, your creditors also have to be paid. We'll consider the heirs, consider any beneficiaries and so on. Avoid fraud. And then there are certain people who definitely need to know that you've passed away. You're receiving benefits or you're a member or whatever. And so it's going to supervise that process of getting that done. There are certainly fees and taxes that you need to think about. So in the default wording that we use, when you appoint a guardian, when you appoint an executor, we say without bond. But otherwise, that person would have to basically take out a little insurance policy, posting a bond, that says, I'm going to be fiducially responsible, I'm not going to be neglectful, I'm going to take care of all of this, and that's the court's way of supervising it. So if the person is someone you trust, you can say no bond is necessary. There are certainly different costs in a simple will versus a living trust. Up front, for a simple will for a couple, you might pay $700 to $1,000. Up front, for a living trust, you might pay $2,500 to $3,500. There may be maintenance fees along the way. There might be trust fees to that bank department. So it is more expensive up front. On the back end, if you have a simple will, then it could be $10,000 to $15,000 in fees and expenses that come out of your estate versus the living trust where it's all taken care of. You've appointed someone to be a successor. They simply step in and continue to manage the property, follow any instructions that are in there. So there is a balance there, and that's why I say the living trust is a useful tool. and I can certainly spend more time talking about that with you individually or at a later date, but you have to balance it. Is it the best tool for me? I can't tell you that. I can give you the pros and cons, advantages, disadvantages, and then with your attorney's help, you can decide, is a simple will enough, or is a living trust enough? Another reason for a living trust, if you have property that you want to stay in the family, again, a vacation home, farmland, whatever, a living trust can do that much more easily than a simple will. There are taxes that may come to those who survive you or may be part of your estate, so income tax, estate tax. The federal estate tax is not something we have to worry about. It's like $26 million for a couple. So if you make more than that, then yes, you have to pay estate tax. I don't know what the Wisconsin estate tax is, but that's probably going to apply. Inheritance tax, not in Wisconsin, but states like Nebraska, doesn't matter what you inherit, you have to pay a tax on it. And the closer you are related to the individual, the smaller the tax. So if you're just a friend, I think it's 18% in Nebraska. Not in Wisconsin, fortunately. And then capital gains, and that could apply to property and so on. Okay. Do I really need an attorney to create a will? Well, no. You can do it yourself, but if you simply take a piece of paper, you know, the movie where the guy's dying and he writes it on a napkin or a piece of notebook paper, and you write, "This is my will," and you sign it, not valid in Wisconsin. Some states may be, but not valid in Wisconsin. Now, if it's typed out and it's witnessed and it's signed, that's a different story. But it's kind of questionable state by state, what is acceptable, what is not. If I print it out and then I use my hand to write in the blanks, is that acceptable? It's hard to say. So a holographic will is when you write it yourself. If you do it yourself, and there's lots of do-it-yourself wills on the internet. I mean, I could probably come up with half a dozen names right off the top of my head. Just be careful, because they are one size fits most. And you may be putting something in the wrong place. It might have language that's unclear. It's not legally sufficient. And if someone challenges it, maybe it would fall apart. So just be careful. And of course, if your Uncle Joe is a divorce lawyer, he could put the papers together for you for your estate plans. But really, it's better to get someone whose practice is in estate planning or in elder law. Attorneys have varying schedules for their fees. Some states have a law as to how they can collect those fees. Sometimes it's hourly, and it's like $300 an hour, something like that. It might be a menu. You can have this for this amount, this for this amount, or it's kind of a package deal, and it may include changes. That's a good thing to ask about. I brought this up before. I've talked to various attorneys. Some will say everyone should have a living trust, and some have said to me, we hardly ever recommend or use or recommend them anymore. So maybe try to get to know what's your attorney's perspective. Now, are they someone who represents someone in probate court? Well, guess what? They're going to favor probate. If there's someone who really their bread and butter is creating these trusts, they're likely to recommend them to you. So think about that as you're talking about them. And we do have a list of names, and I'm very careful to say that were suggested by other WELS members. And I say it's a starting point. So I can provide this list to you, and you can start looking on their websites or giving them a call. But shop around. It's okay to do that. When should I review my plans? Well, there's a change in law, a change in your assets, so you've started using your retirement account, you've just inherited something, and so on, lost a job, took a different job. It's time to think, okay, do my plans still make sense according to this new change in my situation? If there's a change in your family, this might be immediate or extended family. So I like to think in terms of decades. Think about your kids. First decade, grade school. Second decade, high school, college. Third decade, they're probably getting married and having kids. So life is different when you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. So as you approach those milestones, ask yourself, should we maybe think about reviewing our plans? But if there's a marriage or a divorce, again, in the immediate family, it might be some of the people that you've nominated. Death, terminal illness, your health has gone down for some reason. Now, moving to a different state does not necessarily void your will, but there might be some provisions there that don't apply in that state and vice versa. So again, it's good to review it at those times. Now I'm going to quickly go through some ways that you can provide for your heirs, for your family, and for ministry. When we're talking about our children, grandchildren, sometimes we're giving them just out of love. Sometimes we know that they're going to need the money. And sometimes it's, well, that's what we do, right? We give to our children and to our grandchildren. But make sure that you're doing it in a way that's going to help them. And that's where your Christian giving counselors come in, is we're going to help you to walk through that process, maybe to avoid some of the pitfalls that you didn't realize were there. Here's some other things to consider, though. Okay, I said minors cannot inherit. The state has a plan, UTMA, Uniform Transfer to Minors Act, but that ends at age 21, so maybe something different. We talked about special needs, whether it's your children, your parents, someone else, an adult in your family, especially if they've got that federal aid. If all of a sudden now they're receiving this big influx of money, the government's going to say, well, they don't need our federal aid anymore, so you want to be careful in how you structure that. We talked about the spendthrift, tax considerations, I mentioned a few of those. And then, here's something too, that maybe your children don't really need your inheritance. Maybe they're better off than you are. So that frees up your funds for ministry, for charity, for something else. Okay, when we're talking about gifts for your church, for WELS ministries, for charities, we're thinking about something from your will or trust. And notice I've switched to the small booklet. It is 25 after, and I can probably be done in 5 minutes. Is that good? Okay, Pastor gives me a thumbs up. All right, so most of the time we think of a bequest. So that might be a specific amount of money. It might be a percent. It might be specific property. WELS Foundation has a gift acceptance policy. If your church does not, then I would encourage your leaders to think about a gift acceptance policy. Okay, because sometimes there are gifts that they're given in faith and love, but they're not very useful as a gift. Most young couples, their first exposure to giving to ministry is the common disaster clause. That was in our first will. So if something happens to my wife, to me, to all our kids, we have no heirs, then this is what we want. So people will mention their siblings, their parents, or sometimes a larger gift to ministry. At some point, though, I said, you know what? That common disaster is not likely. And so that means that my gift to ministry is not likely to happen. So I changed my thinking, and now I'm of the opinion where it's 3 kids and Jesus. So I want to divide everything I have 3 ways. My biggest asset right now is life insurance. So on my beneficiary designation, it says 25% to this child, to this child, to this child, and 25% to WELS Foundation. Now here's the easy button. So you can use beneficiary designation or your will. Any charitable gift can go to WELS Foundation. And then that then can be divided up. They'll send a check to your church, to WELS Ministries, or even to charities, as long as at least 50% of that gift is WELS related. So I've met people who have 12 designations, and they're getting down to like 7.5% to this. And so you can do it that way, but it is the easy button because then you don't have to change your will, change the designations. And this is for organizations, not for individuals. So WELS is not going to give anything to your nephew, but to ministries and to charities. If you have personal property, especially property that you don't want necessarily the executor to sell, it's grandma's ring, it's those quilts, it's your collectibles. I knew one man who had as many tractors as he had grandchildren. One to each of them, okay? So specific items, and you don't want your kids to necessarily to fight about it, especially when emotions are high at a funeral. And so you can either list it out. This child gets this item. This grandchild gets this item. Or you can just give instructions. It can be like the football draft. Start at the oldest, go down to the youngest, start at the youngest, go back to the oldest, and so on. So a personal memorandum or letter, it is valid in Wisconsin. If you move to Illinois, it's not. The attorney will have to help you to work around that. Your retirement plans, it used to be that I could inherit my grandparents' IRA, for example, and then I could stretch it out for my lifetime. It was a great deal. The stretch IRA has basically gone away. So if you have qualified funds, IRA, 403B, 401k, and you want it to go to your children, a spouse is different. If you want it to go to your children, they have to use it up in 10 years. It means they could spend it all in year 1, or they could stretch it out for 10, but it's ordinary taxable income. So what a lot of people have said, you know what? I'm going to use my retirement plans, and that's where my charitable giving is going to come from. Or at least that's the first place to look for my charitable giving. So if I want to give 25% of my estate, let's carve that figure out of my IRA 403b first, and then if that wasn't enough, then we'll make it up somewhere else. So if the charity gets it, ministry gets it, it basically goes further because there is no tax to them. Now, there is something called a Give It Twice Trust. WELS Foundation has it, other organizations have it, and this is kind of how it works. Especially for retirement assets, you designate them to go to WELS Foundation, to this trust that we've already set up in your name. WELS Foundation will make payments to your children or heirs, and the magic number right now is 5% of that trust value every year. They can stretch it out for 20 years. Well, 5% times 20 years, that would be 100%, but it's still being invested, so there is a remainder for ministry. And that goes to the ministry, to the charity, to your congregation, according to your instructions. You can also give to an endowment, which is simply restricted funds. Usually it's only a certain percentage that's used every year. There are various WELS endowments, home missions, world missions, ministerial education, so on. But you can also designate an endowment. Most of the scholarships at our prep schools, at our seminary, at our College of Ministry, MLC, have been designated by individuals. But you could also designate an endowment for your church. So if you ever thought, you know what, someday when I go to heaven, my offerings are going to go away. I wish I could just keep giving my offerings even though I'm not here. You can. The formula is simply to take your annual offering, multiply it by 25, set that up as an endowment, and it may continue giving until Jesus comes home. So, something to think about. So, does your will or trust give a percentage to ministry? Have you thought about that? Will it happen? And that's kind of the key. A lot of people think, okay, I've got it all figured out. Yep, 10%, that's what my will says. Well, no, your life insurance says that most of that goes to your children. So look at the big picture. Have you reviewed your plans lately? I'm here to help you do that. And what will your legacy be? Now, the last part that I didn't cover, and I'm just going to mention it real quickly, is planned gifts. So as I talk about planned gifts, I use 3 factors as kind of a working definition. So in some way, it might provide a tax advantage, like the qualified charitable distribution that your 70-and-a-half-year-olds can do. Or it might use an asset other than cash. So we've met a lot of people who are doing their church offerings by donating stock. They can save on the capital gains. Or you can also give a gift, and again, WELS Foundation does this as well as others, where you give a large gift now in exchange for an income. That legacy charitable remainder trust is an example of that. So that is my presentation. I'll be happy to stick around and answer any questions. I hope maybe I've planted some seeds in your head. My information is on a business card in that folder. Please feel free to call me, text me, and Pastor is reminding that I want to collect those. Where should we put them, Pastor? Where would be a good place? You can just leave them on a pew in the back or give them all to Pastor or whatever you want to do, and I'll take them from him. So, all right, thank you very much, and I'll let you get on with your Sunday afternoon.